What product sells more than a pumpkin spice latte in the fall? An iPhone 14 Pro.
What's up, Beefcakes? It's Cal and Austin.
And we back, boy! Let's go!
Today we're talking iPhone 14 Pro. Apple beefed up the internals slightly, but made some pretty big upgrades in the camera and the software. Like this.
Okay, so for this year's iPhone 14 Pro, we're seeing the same stainless steel rails that we saw last year. We have a matte glass finish on the back with the Gorilla Glass Victus Plus. We're also seeing an IP68 water and dust rating. The big design change we also saw is the removal of a physical SIM tray, and now we have a eSIM. So what this looks like for users is essentially no more of that little pin you pop out. It's automatically built into the phone. So this does enable super easy transfer. However, downside is that if you try to unlock the phone or if you try to go international, there's no way for you to pop in an international SIM card or a prepaid SIM card. You just have to figure it out with your service provider.
So the iPhone 14 Pro keeps the same 3-camera setup that we're all familiar with. The ultra-wide and the telephoto camera are pretty much the same as last year, but the brand new 48 megapixel main sensor is what this camera is all about. With the 48 megapixel sensor, Apple finally did what everyone else in the phone industry has done and gone to a bigger sensor. The main upgrades that come with the bigger sensor are a faster shutter speed, better low light performance, and this new 2x optical zoom feature. It's weird, but it works. Basically, the camera is cropping to the inner 12 megapixels of the 48 megapixels to give you just a 2x optical zoom pretty much. You don't even need a different lens, different camera. All your photos are going to be in 12 megapixels anyway, so it's going to come out with pretty much the same quality as a 1x. Just the 48 megapixel sensor is going to have a slightly sharper image than the 2x. One slight drawback with a bigger sensor is having edge fringing, which is slightly noticeable on these images. Edge fringing just means there's slight blurring along the edges of the photo, but it's pretty much not noticeable. The other great thing about having a bigger sensor is you get this natural bokeh, this blurred background without having to use portrait mode, which is nice because it looks more natural. It's a real blurred background. Apple also added a new feature that they're calling their photonic engine, which I don't know why they have to name everything, but the image processing is way better. You get better consistent colors. It's a little much on the HDR side of things. It kind of overdoes it a little bit, especially in harsh conditions. But overall, it looks so much better. Basically, it's just adding more image processing to your photos. It's doing more steps in the process before you get your final edited picture. Pretty much, it just makes your photos look a tiny bit better. One feature that makes the iPhone one of the best at taking video is the sensor shift OIS. This is where when you're taking a video, the sensor inside the camera module is actually auto-stabilizing itself. So when you're moving around and taking video, it looks like a perfectly clean video and there's no shaking whatsoever. Not whatsoever, but you get the point. Apple's sticking with their guns and capping their resolution at 4K, whereas Samsung and other phone companies are going with 8K. Fine, keeps file size down. 8K doesn't look that good on phones anyway. Last year, Apple introduced the new cinematic mode, which is back on this phone. It's really great. It adds that kind of fake depth of field and blur. It makes videos feel more cinematic, and they also added 30 frames per second instead of just 24 frames per second this year. They also added a new feature called Action Mode, which is even more stabilization than the sensor shift OIS itself. I think it has a little ways to go. It uses that ultra-wide camera. The resolution is not as good. It's punching in a little bit. It's only capped at 2.8 times. And the image stabilization is really good, but I think it's a little bit on the grainy side, and it always asks for more light in the brightest situations, which is kind of weird. I think a software update would fix that. Overall, Apple stays winning with its new camera hardware. It's the best in class, takes one of the best photos in the world, and it has, I think, the best video system in any smartphone.
That hardware upgrade has been coming for a long time, and they needed to do it if they wanted to keep up with the rest of the market. Speaking of which, I still think the S22 Ultra has the best photography camera on the market at the moment. And not only as a preference, but also in terms of specs. So with the S22 Ultra, you're getting a better digital zoom as well as an optical zoom. Here's one photo that I was standing in the exact same spot for. Here's another photo that with the 10 times zoom, and you can really see just how big of a difference it makes, and it's a lot of fun to play with. The way that S22 uses its image processing at the moment is super good, and it gives super clear photos, and I've really enjoyed taking photos with it. So in my personal opinion, I would still say the S22 Ultra is the king for photography at the moment.
I would have to agree with you. You get great photos at 30 times, whereas you kind of cap out on the iPhone at 8 to 10 times with that, where it starts to get grainy afterwards. I will say though, you just can't beat an iPhone video, especially when it can shoot in ProRes. Can't shoot in 8K like the Samsung, but I think the image stabilization, the resolution, and all of the different modes you can use in iPhone you just can't beat it.
This year's iPhone 14 Pro features a 6.1-inch ProMotion XDR display using an LTPO screen, which essentially means that it has a variable refresh rate from 1 to 120 Hertz. Essentially, if the phone is not doing anything and the screen's in a static state, it'll drop to 1 Hertz like it will in its always-on display mode. And the perks of this is that it helps with your battery life because your phone isn't constantly refreshing its screen. When it's at 120 Hertz, like you're scrolling really fast, or maybe you're gaming on the phone, it gives you a really crisp and really smooth screen. Also, it features a peak brightness of 2000 nits, which is up from last year's phone, which was at a peak brightness of 1200 nits. So Apple got really clever with the iPhone 14 Pro by shrinking their Face ID package, which allows them to create the dynamic island. And this creates a ton of software features, but this is a great feature that you get between the iPhone 14 versus the iPhone 14 Pro, and a huge selling point, which you can tell by all the commercials you're seeing.
As far as performance goes, Apple just brought us a yearly spec upgrade that we all expect. They have the new A16 Bionic chip, up from the A15 Bionic chip from last year. And actually, the iPhone 14 has an upgraded version of the A15 Bionic chip from last year. So that kind of gives a little bit of differentiation between the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 14.
Which is interesting because we aren't really seeing that with some Android phones, particularly the Pixel. You get a pretty consistent lineup across the three phones. There's definitely differences, but not necessarily that drastic that the hardware even changes. So it's a good point to bring up.
Apple is quoting an extra 1 hour of continuous video playback this year. Cool. I'm getting about 4 to 4.5 hours of screen on time on a slightly heavy use day and still ending the day with 35 to 40%.
All right, now that we got all that garbage out of the way, what do you actually think of the phone, Cal?
Well, I think Apple's building a bigger gap between the Pro line and the regular line of the iPhone now. The regular has great cameras for day-to-day camera use. They just want to snap a picture here and there. But for those pro photography and videography people who want the best of the best, I think this new Pro line of cameras is the best Apple's ever done and probably the biggest leap between generations that they've ever done.
Yeah, I agree. We've definitely seen a lot of image processing upgrades from Apple over the years, but this is for sure a huge hardware spec upgrade that we see. Another thing to talk about is you do get the dynamic island that we talked about earlier. And in my opinion, I think that might be worth it too, especially if this is your daily driver. This is a great reason to switch and pay the extra for the iPhone 14 Pro.
I think the dynamic island's definitely one of the coolest features about the iPhone 14 Pro. It's definitely not something that would put you over the edge and go towards the iPhone 14 Pro over the regular in and of itself, just like the chip. But I think it's another great feature that you get as a bonus for going for that Pro line.
It does also have a really stupid name, so I don't know what they're thinking in terms of that. All right, now it's time for recommendations.
I would definitely recommend the iPhone 14 Pro to people who are into the bleeding edge tech in the industry, or anyone who's just a tech enthusiast in general. This has all the best features you could possibly find. It's one of the best packages in the industry. I would also recommend this to anyone who's super into photography or videography. It's not going to replace your Canon R5s, your Sony A7S IIIs, or anything like that, but it's a great camera package in your pocket that you can just snap and go, set it up on a tripod, put it on a gimbal. I mean, this thing can do a lot of things. I would also recommend this to a college student who's still on their parents' plan, maybe you can convince them to get this phone for you. Or if you have $1,000 just burning a hole in your wallet, this is a great phone for $1,000. Final recommendation, I would say anyone with an iPhone 12 or 12 Pro or older than that, I would say this is a great upgrade. You'll get that 2 extra years of software updates guaranteed. And it's the same form factor pretty much, but with huge spec upgrades, especially in the cameras and the performance.
My first person to not recommend this to, anyone on a serious budget. Although this is a great phone with great hardware, if you're a college student on a budget, if you're just trying to save money, this is not the phone for you. $1,000 is a lot for any piece of tech. My second no would be iPhone 13 users. The upgrade is significant, but not enough to be worth $1,000. If there's a trade-in option, that could be worth it, especially if you're only spending, I don't know, maybe roughly $500. Then maybe the spec upgrade is worth it if you have the money to spend. But I would not just say you need to spend a whole $1,000 on a new iPhone 14. Finally, if you're not really interested in like the latest tech or the brand new iPhone, you just want to be part of the Apple ecosystem, I really don't think this is the phone for you either. I would suggest probably an iPhone 13 or maybe even a 12 depending on what your budget is, but I don't think you need to go straight for the 14 Pro. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for the video. So before we send you off to go live your happy little lives with your little pumpkin spice lattes and your Ugg boots, maybe your Canada Goose, first we got 2 questions for you. What's your favorite upgrade in the new iPhone 14 Pro? The second question is, do you get an iPhone based on its specs and hardware, or do you just get the newest iPhone when your contract is up?
Leave a like down below if you like the iPhone 14 Pro, and definitely get subscribed if you want to see more phone reviews coming soon.
Anyways, that's pretty much it for the video. Always remember, can't be beefy
without the cake.